He plays c6, the Caro-Kann defense. That's the defense I use with black. Well, I'm going to play d4. I'm taking the center, the duo of pawns in the center. Normally, black push d5 now. The pawn on c6 is there to support d5, and that's what he does. And which variation am I going to choose? I can choose the advance variation, the exchange variation, or the protection variation. I'm going to choose the exchange variation. So this doesn't lead to a symmetrical position, you see, because when he recaptures with the pawn from c6 to d5, and that's what he does, he opens this semi-open c file, and I open the semi-open e file. So there are imbalances. It's not an exchange that flattens out the position. No, on the contrary, it's an exchange that unbalances the position. And here, I'm going to fight against the development of his bishop on the white square. I'm going to play bishop d3. I want him to be forced to play e6 and trap his bishop. And for now, he can't develop his bishop to either f5 or g4. He plays knight to f6 and prepares to develop his bishop to g4, but I'm going to prevent that with h3. And there it is, he plays e6. So now I'm going to play knight to f3. And if he plays knight to c6, I'll play c3 to strengthen my pawn structure on the queen side. He plays bishop to d6. Well, I'm going to castle. He plays his pawn to a6. The rook on the semi-open file, that can't hurt. The rook will breathe better on e1 than it would on f1 in this position. And it can also support my knight coming to e5, by the way. He plays b5. I think I'm going to advance to e5. All right, I'm advancing to e5, to the outpost on e5 with my knight. For now, he's not yet revealing what he's going to do with his king, even though we suspect he'll probably kingside castling in this position. For now, he stays in the center. After all, the e file, the central file, isn't completely open. His pawn is still on a6. He plays queen to c7. So he places the queen on the semi-open c file and doubles the pressure on the knight, which for now is sufficiently defended. I think I'm going to play queen e2. Why this move, queen to e2? I'm thinking if at some point he plays knight to d7 or bishop to b7, meaning if his bishop no longer protects the pawn on e6, there could be ideas of knight takes on f7, followed by queen takes on e6 with check. Actually, that's especially true after knight to d7, because after bishop to b7, the queen would still defend on f7. But we're going to play this idea, queen to e2. He plays kingside castling. I'm going to bring out the bishop to g5 anyway. Now with the rook protecting f7, this idea really loses its appeal, but you never know, it might still happen in the game. So now the idea is to shift my play to the king side. I have a space advantage on the e file. And when you have a space advantage on the file adjacent to the king side, in this case the e file, you can bring much more force to the attack than your opponent can bring to the defense. My offensive reinforcement will be greater than his defensive consolidation. He plays knight to d7. So I'm not afraid if he takes my knight. Recapturing with the pawn creates a fork. I'm going to develop my other knight to bring in reinforcements. The knight can take some rather unusual routes. It can go to f1, come back to g3, and then go to h5 afterwards. And if knight takes, recapturing with the queen, and right away it will attack the pawn on h7 with the bishop. And you can see that I have a lot of white pieces capable of leading the assault on the king side. But for now, his position is solid. I still don't know where I'm going to strike. So my opponent is thinking a lot. It's a 15-minute game plus 10 seconds per move. So I sped up the sequence in the editing simply to bring you directly to the move he played. Well, we're going to do the knight maneuver I mentioned earlier, knight to f1. At the same time, I was also considering the possibility not of going to g3 then h5, but of going to h2 then g4 with my knight. The difference is that if knight takes, I can of course recapture with the queen, but I'm also interested in recapturing with the pawn. The pawn can sometimes also help me in the attack against his king. He plays f5. So he can't play bishop a6, right? Because I have my bishop and my queen controlling the square a6, since he'd like to be able to play that move to get rid of his bishop, which is struggling to play against my bishop, which is an attacking bishop. And maybe he'll try to play moves like queen b6 to support bringing the bishop to a6, right? That's why I also need to develop very quickly on the king side, knight to g3. So he played the pawn to h6. He's questioning my bishop, and it's true that here, if I retreat to h4, I get hit with g5, and I can't retreat anymore, right? If I take his knight on f6, I allow him to recapture with his knight, and in the end, I relieve some of the pressure for him. I can also retreat to f4. If he plays g5 against me, he still weakens his castling, you know? I could retreat with my bishop, and he will still have weakened his castling. But I'm still looking at the consequences of bishop takes knight. Knight recaptures. And now knight to h5. If he takes with his knight, queen recaptures, but do I have any concrete threats in his position? I don't feel like I have any threats, you know. Afterwards, I can maneuver my rook. I could play rook e3 and, for example, rook g3 to bring a new piece to the attack. That's possible. That's the advantage of space on the e-file, by the way. It gives me this third rank with the square e3, which allows my rooks to come back to the attack. All right, I take his knight on f6, and I'm going to follow up with knight to h5. Maybe it's not the best way to go about attacking. We'll look at that in the analysis, because this is a position that interests me. I still have quite a few pieces that are heading towards his king. On the other hand, his position is still solid. He has enough to defend himself, and I'm interested to know how to conduct the assault. There, he recaptured with the knight on f6. Now I play knight to h5, the queen defends. And if the knights are exchanged, well, in the end, I will have removed those two knights, which were the only two pieces really able to defend his castling, you see. And after that, he can't chase away my queen with moves like g6 because he loses the pawn on h6. So the idea after knight takes, queen takes, is to bring a new piece into the attack with rook to e3, rook to g3 to pin the pawn on g7, and then threaten queen takes h6. And after that, I have mating threats. And if he doesn't take me, I'll probably take his knight and dismantle the shelter around his king. Afterwards, I have a move like knight to g4, which will attack f6 and h6. And if he plays king to g7 to defend both, well, maybe I'll have ways to attack with my queen. But anyway, he took, right? So queen takes. And now I'm going to try to launch an attack with bishop, knight, queen, and rook against his king. He plays bishop to a 6. Now he can provoke this exchange of bishop. It really bothers me to have to exchange this bishop that could have helped me in the attack. That's bad news for me. And on top of that, after bishop takes, the pawn on c2 becomes weak. That is, either I recapture with the pawn from c2 to d3 and I have double pawns here, or I'm going to lose the pawn on c2 and the queen will be able to come and take it. So I look at rook to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes. He might want to come attack the pawn on d4 with moves like queen to b6, but rook to g3, and now I threaten queen takes h6. If he plays moves like g6, there will be sacrifices. But he might be able to move his king aside, perhaps. You see rook to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes. Let's imagine he plays queen to b6. Queen to b6, he still gets hit by the fork with knight to d7, right? So rook to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and for example, queen to a7 to attack the pawn on d4. Rook to g3. Yes, he can still take on d4 because when I play queen takes h6, afterwards he can take the knight. He defends g7 and watch out for his attacks along the diagonal. It could turn against me. So that means after rook to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen to a7, I still have to defend d4. Queen to g4 to defend it, right? Yeah, I don't see anything else but rook to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen to a7, queen to g4. And still this idea of playing rook to g3 afterwards. Let's play it like that. Rook to e3. In terms of time, things have balanced out a bit. I had a time advantage, but his move bishop to a6 set me back. I had anticipated this move bishop to a6, but it's true that as long as my queen was on e2, he couldn't play bishop to a6. But since I provoked exchanges on h5 and my queen ended up on h5, that allowed him to play bishop to a6. And I had played the whole opening against the fact that this bishop hadn't come out precisely. So for this bishop to be exchanged for my bishop is very bad news. Moreover, this bishop on d3 was very strong, both for attacking and for defending the pawn on c2, and therefore for countering all of my opponent's play on the queen side. So he takes, I recapture with the pawn. And my opponent plays rook to c8. Now he's being tricky. He wants to chase away my knight to control the h2 square and threaten back rank mate with queen to c1. Rook takes and rook recaptures. If my king can't escape to h2, there will be an unstoppable mate. But on the one hand, if he chases my knight, I can come back to f3 and then queen to c1 won't work because rook takes with check, and my rook can come back to defend under the protection of the knight or even my knight itself. And on the other hand, in any case, I can also play other moves to avoid that. For example, I don't know, g3 or even rook to g3, since that way there will no longer be control over the h2 square. So if I play rook to g3, what is he going to do? Will he play f6 to attack my knight, which will be pinned? Because here I can play queen takes h6, but the black queen will defend the pawn on g7 on the 7th rank, so I won't have the mate threat and he will be able to take my knight calmly. So if I play rook to g3, he plays f6 against me. But if I play the pawn to g3 to give, for example, the escape square on g2, I give up the idea of transferring my rook. So it's tricky, this position, very tricky. I think I'm going to bring back the other rook in black. It wasn't participating in the fight. Maybe this time it will help me participate. If he comes to c2 to attack the pawn b2, maybe the departure of his queen will allow me to find a sacrifice somewhere. Well, already I would have rook to g3 now because on f6, queen takes h6, I would threaten mate on g7. You see? So here I'm not afraid of his queen entering on c2 actually. That would only allow me to launch the attack against his king. Moreover, the queen on the 7th rank is very important to defend both f7 and g7 if the pawn advances. Because f7 can also be exposed to sacrifices, you know. If the queen isn't there, knight takes, rook takes, rook takes. I don't know what that leads to, probably nothing, but the opponent would do well to keep an eye on it. So it's true that my pawn structure has been weakened with the doubled pawns, but I still have this knight on the outpost at e5. And this space advantage still allows my pieces to converge toward his king, even if I can't manage to finish the attack. So he plays queen to 7, just as we expected. He's attacking d4 and still defending the 7th rank. That's well played. But here, I think I'm going to play queen to g4, especially since now on f6 there will be queens takes e6 check. So queen to g4, but with queen to g4 he can play f5 to attack my queen. But that's not a problem. He'll also weaken some squares if he plays f5, right? Maybe I even go to g6. He takes the pawn on d4. I play queen takes 6 check. Then I take his bishop afterwards, you see? So I'm going to play queen to g4. That defends the pawn on d4. And now rook to g3 could come, although with rook to g3 there will always be f6, right? I could never take it on g7. He defends on the 7th rank by attacking the knight behind my rook. But with rook to g3, we said that after f6 I had queen takes 6 check. So in the end, it will be possible. He plays f5. So his goal is to weaken d4, but he weakens the white squares. I have a knight, he doesn't. He has a bishop on a black square, so I have one more piece to fight on the white squares. It could be very interesting to get into g6, but rook f6. He's going to come defend like that, push back my queen, and then take d4. I'm not going to play queen f4, still under the aim of his bishop. Maybe queen h4, and if he plays g5, queen takes h6. It's not a problem if I lose the pawn on d4 as long as I manage to take the pawn on h6. So queen h4. Maybe he'll play bishop e7, protected by my queen to attack me, but no, he plays f4. He's attacking my rook and wants to cut off my queen's defense of the pawn on d4. But he's going to suffer losses himself at some point, because if I retreat to e2 and he takes d4, I play knight f3, I attack his queen, and then the pawn on 6 will fall. But rook e2, what bothers me is f3, but there's knight takes, right? But rook e2, bishop takes knight. I could recapture with the rook. No, that's fine. So I retreat to e2. So here I let him take on d4 so I can then play knight f3 and get my revenge on e6. There you go. That's what's happening. Knight f3, I attack his queen. The pawn on f4 is actually good news for me because his bishop against the pawn on h2 is blocked by the pawn, and we're going to get our revenge on e6. On the other hand, he can play queen f6, offer the exchange of queens, and after queen takes, the rook recaptures. Rook takes e6, rook takes, rook recaptures. I'm still attacking his bishop. He can insert a check so that my king ends up badly placed. And his rook is still going to break into my position, you see. He takes on d3. So I take on e6. And you see, in this battle of colors, a bishop on a black square against the knight, maybe I can't get my knight to play on the white squares, which is the color I should be able to play on, but his bishop on a black square with this pawn on f4 won't be able to play along the diagonal. That's the good news. My king can find shelter on h2 and he'll never be able to capture his own pawn on f4. So in the end, this pawn on f4 is working against him. And he plays bishop to c5, he's going to want to put pressure on another diagonal on f2. He'll want to bring in his queen, maybe queen to c2 at some point. So I have my queen defending. I can also play rooks to e2. But let's not forget that I'm down a pawn, right? Right now, I am looking at moving queen to h5, specifically to attack d5 and open up the square for my knight, so it can finally join the fight. But then I am worried that I will get hit with f3 immediately afterwards. Queen h5, letting me exchange rooks, play rook to e8 and form a queen and knight tandem collaborative in the attack. For example, queen to h5, if rook to f5, I'll hit him with rook to e8. So I'm still going to play queen to h5 to see what he'll do. Maybe he'll play queen to c2 to attack f2, but he'll lose the protection of d5 with possible discovered attack afterwards. So you see queen to c2, queen takes. So he can play bishop takes f2 check, king to h1. He can play bishop takes rook, but after that my rook can go to e2. If my queen is on d5, give him check and pick up his queen. So there you go, queen to c2 is played, right? So after queen takes d5, am I afraid of queen takes f2? No, I play king to h1, I'm not too worried. Queen takes d5, bishop takes f2. I'll lose the exchange, but there will be counterattacks afterwards with the discovered attack. I don't really want to give up that pawn on f2 though. I think I'm going to play rook to e2. He can come in with check, but is it really dangerous? I don't think so. All right, I'll play rook to e2. So here, the idea is not to give up the pawn on f2 and always keep an eye on d5. And if the queen leaves this diagonal, there could also be rook takes h6, pawn takes, queen to g6 check, king to h8, queen takes h6. And at the very least, I have a perpetual check that leads to the draw. And more, if I'm able to bring my knight or my rook to try to checkmate him, I'll think about it then. But there could actually be ideas of rook takes h6, you know. But only if his queen is no longer watching over the g6 square and this defensive retreat diagonal. There you go. He plays queen check, so king to h2. He currently still has his pawn on d5, actively attacking. He has kept this diagonal. So if he plays queen takes a2 to defend d5, that's when I'll be interested in rook takes h6. But he comes back to f5. He is offering the exchange of queens while preventing me from taking his pawn on d5. He's right. Can I play queen h4 to decline this exchange? I'm not afraid of g5. I'll have the capture of the pawn on h6. Queen h4, and then I'll threaten moves like rook e5 maybe. All right, queen to h4. I'm down a pawn, but I have control of the e-file, but he's pushing his passed pawn. Here we go. This is the tough moment for me. So now I'll have to go to e5, but I don't know which rook to use. Probably this one. All right, rook to e5. He pushes his passed pawn to d4. I have control of the e-file. I have 4 pieces on the right flank of the board. I'm going to have to find sacrifices at some point. Unfortunately, my knight, for the instant, can't participate in the attack. I'm not giving up hope that it will manage to. He moves back to h5. He's very cautious and is wary of possible sacrifices. Does rook takes bishop give me anything? Rook takes. I can eliminate his pawn, but it still costs me an exchange. I don't think that's worthwhile. Maybe go back to h5 to attack his bishop on the black square and give up the h4 square with my knight so it can get to g6, try to suffocate his position. Maybe, yeah. All right, queen to h5. So if he pushes the pawn to d3, he loses the bishop, right? So for now, he can't push his passed pawn. I still have the option with the queen on h5 to support rook e8 as well. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, queen takes, check. The bishop comes back, but now it gets really interesting for me. He goes to c2. He didn't want his queen to get trapped and comes to defend his bishop. So after rook takes the piece, then pawn takes more, and finally queen takes. What do I have? Probably nothing. I can't find anything. I don't have much time left. This is going to be tough. All right, I'll play rook to e8. Maybe I should have stayed on e6 because if he pushed, I would have had the capture on h6 now. Because the queen didn't have the defensive retreat. I messed up there. Maybe I shouldn't have played rook to e8. I should have kept the rook on e6. He plays d3. After carefully analyzing the current state of the board and considering all of my available tactical options, I have finally decided that I am going to move my piece forward to capture his rook, which is currently positioned on the c8 square, as this move seems to be the most advantageous play for my overall strategy at this particular moment in our game. I'm going to force the exchange of the rooks. I'm already getting ready to recapture with check. There we go. He's probably going to want to bring his bishop back to f8. If he comes to h7, there will be queen e4 check. He's coming back. Can I attack with my knight? I don't think so. I'm going to give him a check here. I'll find the squares with my knight and target the white squares. With pawns and bishop on black squares, his white squares are weak. First, actually, come to f5 when his king moves. I'm attacking his bishop and I'm going to pin his pawn, and then I'll bring my knight back. There, queen to f5. His pawn is pinned. I'm attacking his bishop and I want to bring my c-knight towards the white squares. Also, knight to e5, by the way, that will attack his pawn on d3 twice. But he'll probably play bishop to d6 here. So in that case, I'll go through h4. No, he's playing bishop there. So I go through e5. I'm threatening knight to g6, the fork. King bishop. I'm attacking the pawn on d3 twice, which is pinned. I'm managing to find play on the white squares. He can't get through with his passed pawn. He can't find play on the black squares. He might play bishop to f6. That's it. Knight to f7 check, king to g8, knight takes on h6 check, pawn takes, queen takes. He's going to push forward. I won't have the g6 square to give checks, but I'll have the e6 square. What else do I have otherwise? Knight to g6 check, king to g8, queen to e6, and we don't have mate. He'll go to h7, but there will be knight escape. At least I'll have the perpetual here. Let's try that anyway. King h7, knight escape, king h8. Queen f5, I'm threatening mate, but he'll go to g8. So here I only have the check. If I come here, what happens? Even if I move with my knight, he'll go there, right? If I give check, he'll take the knight, and I'll have nothing. I'll have nothing, right? I'm going to have to repeat the moves. That's a shame. Queen there, I'm checking again. He'll come here, and I have absolutely nothing. I have to repeat. Let's see where I messed up my attack. So the computer tells me I had a winning position. I didn't see it. I missed it. There was a lack of time, but let's see if you can find it. The computer gives me 88% accuracy versus 86 for my opponent. It tells me that the rating for the game on the white side is 2,400 hello versus 2,350 on the black side. That the opening was very well played by both players. 95% accuracy for me, 92 for him. In the middle game, I have 80% accuracy, just like my opponent, and that's where I slipped up. It was in the middle game, not in the end game. In reality, in the end game, at the end of the game, I have 100% accuracy. I'm playing the best moves, and at that point, all I can do is repeat moves. And I don't have a winning position in the end game, but in the middle game, I do. So let's take a look. Now, let's see if you'll do better than I did. In this position, sure, my opponent has a passed pawn, the d4 pawn, one more passed pawn, but I have the coordination of the rooks on the file, and so I'm attacking his queen. The queen comes to h-chief. Now I play queen h5, attacking the bishop twice. The queen goes back to c2 to defend, and here I missed the right move. I played rook 8. And by the way, remember I told you in the video, at the moment I played rook 8, I thought, no, actually, I should have kept the rook on the 6th rank. And you, what do you think? You can pause the video. So what should have been done? I wanted to wait for him to push the pawn to d3 before sacrificing on h6. But actually, taking on h6 is possible here. We can take on h6. But why didn't I want to do it? Because I was afraid of the defensive retreat of the queen. But in reality, this position is winning for white. I can play queen 6 check. If the rook comes to f7, certainly moves like knight g5 or rook g5 check are coming. If it's his queen that comes to f7, maybe queen g4 check. If he puts the queen on g7 to protect himself from rook g5, he loses the queen. And if his king tries to escape, for example, by playing king to h8, we can play knight to g5, attacking his queen. For example, queen to g7, knight to e4. So it's quite funny, this alignment of the white pieces, but it attacks his dark square bishop twice. And then the fact that the knight comes to e4 frees up the possibility for the rook to deliver a check, with the queen controlling the ga8 square. There are actually too many threats against the black king, who has no shelter in this position, so white will at the very least recover their pieces, but with a completely winning position, because you can't play as black with such a weak king. So in this position, it was possible to sacrifice on h6. But honestly, I didn't really believe in it at that point in the game, and I preferred to play rook to 8. I told myself I'm going to remove his rooks from the 8th rank to weaken his king and have the queen and knight duo, this very collaborative tandem for attacking the white squares. Since I had noticed he no longer had any pawns on f7 and that the pawns on g7 and h6 were on black square, I knew I was going to have attacks against his king. Unfortunately, the attack leads to nothing more than a draw. So there you have it, an interesting game against an opponent who gave me trouble in this match. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. You can give a thumbs up, leave comments, share the video, and support the channel. We'll meet again soon for new adventures. Goodbye, everyone.